It really has been. Been working really hard to try to condense these books down to you into one message, and I just can't do it all the time. I literally changed this message like 3 times. Last night I finally just decided, I think we're just going to talk about the life of Solomon today a little bit, and then we're going to get into the rest of the kings next week. So praise the Lord for that. I won't keep you an extra hour, because that's probably what it would have been. But 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles is what we're going to look at today. So make sure you have your Bibles open. As I've been telling you each week, it's really important that you are following along. I'm not going to read every chapter and every verse that I reference, but it's really important that you are skimming through, because it's the overall message of the book for God to his people that I want you to catch. So we're actually going to be primarily in 1 Kings, and I'm not going to, like I said, we're also going to overlap some of 2 Chronicles, because 2 Chronicles covers the history of this time. We were able to do that successfully with 1 Chronicles last week as we worked through 2 Samuel, and I think that went well. These books overlap in much the same way. 1 and 2 Chronicles are both written down later in Israel's history, later in the future, as a means of looking back and recounting God's faithfulness to his people after they come back from the Babylonian captivity, after they start rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the city. This is when these things are being reported in Chronicles. But 1 Chronicles begins with the genealogy of Adam. 2 Chronicles ends with Babylonian captivity and exile and release from that exile. They're, again, just a historical summary of the entire Old Testament, really. And just as 1 Chronicles covered the transition of the reign of Saul to the reign of David over all of Israel, 2 Chronicles covers the transition from the reign of Solomon, David's son, to the remaining kings who would rule in Judah. And as you're going to see, Judah will break off from the rest of the nation. There's going to be civil war. There's going to be a split. And that's why the 1 Kings chart is labeled at the top, a kingdom divided. And 2 Chronicles chart only covers the kings in Judah. All right. Now, as you'll see on both charts, the first 10 chapters, all about Solomon. And that's, like I said, I don't think we're going to read much past that. We're going to be talking about him primarily today. There's 4 other kings after him in Judah that we'll discuss next week. Rehoboam, Abijam, Asa, and Jehoshaphat. Again, a kingdom that gets divided. David is, of course, going to die by the end of chapter 2 and is handing over the leadership of the nation to his son Solomon. So that's what we're picking up, all right? David is aging. He's fading. If you look at chapter 1, verse 1, put your eyes on the page, that's literally what it's telling us. David has got 1 foot in the grave, all right? 1 foot in glory, if you know where he's going. But I think that's a hard transition too, because he's worked so hard for the kingdom. And while David's vitality is fading and he's in bed, one of his sons, Adonijah, devises a scheme to take the throne. He goes as far as making sacrifices and throwing a big party, trying to just kind of convince everybody that he is going to be the next king. Nathan, the prophet who called David out last week, right, one of the main prophets of the day, and Bathsheba's son, Bathsheba, Solomon's mom, they both know that it's David's desire for Solomon to take the throne, all right, not Adonijah. God clearly told David last week, your son Solomon will be the king. So Nathan and Bathsheba, they tell David about what's going on. And if you look at it, he gives orders to throw an even bigger party, making it publicly known that no, Solomon is going to be the king. All right, so while everybody who was with Adonijah kind of sees this, they quickly disperse. You know, they realize Adonijah is lying, and he's not the next king. And if you look at it, you would find him clinging to the altar for mercy, as he is found out for his scheme. And now Solomon grants him mercy, right? Solomon is coming to the throne. He's the one in power, and he gives him mercy. But he gives them one condition on that. And it's in the second half of chapter 2 that we're going to see. He goes back on that condition. The condition is this: Adonijah, I will not kill you. I will not punish you. I will give you the mercy you're pleading for, but don't do this again. Don't try to play me for the fool. Well, Adonijah doesn't listen. In the second half of chapter 2, you can skim over that. He's plotting another scheme for position and authority in the kingdom. And Solomon has him executed this time, not playing any games. Along with him, Joab, David's nephew, the commander of the army. We talked about him some last week. He gets executed here for going along with the whole scheme. And also, the high priest, Abiathar. He was the only son of Ahimelech to survive Saul's massacre of the priests, if you remember that. He won't be killed, but he gets removed from his position in the priesthood. And the question, it just kind of begs the question, like, what happened to him? Right? He was a good guy. What happened to Joab? He was a good guy. These were some of David's men that he leaned on when he was young and he was upcoming in the kingdom. They were loyal. What changed? I'll tell you what changed. The leadership changed. And they didn't want to go along with that. Apparently, after Solomon took position, their attitudes shifted. They were only loyal to David. And that's a problem. We shouldn't be loyal to people. We should be loyal to the Lord. These guys didn't get that. They were kind of hyper-fixated on their own political agenda, how they thought the kingdom should be run, how they thought things should go, their own opinions. And it destroyed their opportunity to serve their brothers and sisters well any longer. A couple of them died. The priest got removed from his position. Sad. But aren't you glad that's only a problem that was in Israel and no longer an issue in our day and age? You know, people no longer being torn and divided over politics and economy, things in the economy, all. Yeah. So glad we're past that. What a mess. But here's the question. If that's not where our focus should be, what should we be focused on? Chapter 2, verse 1. I want your eyes to look at this verse. Look at how David is encouraging Solomon to move forward as a leader. He's not saying win over the hearts of the people. He's not saying do this to fix the economy. He's not saying do this to drive back other nations. Look at it. Verse 1 of chapter 2. Days of David drew nigh that he should die. And like I said, David has fought hard for the kingdom. He has established it. He's pushed back. He's done a lot of things. He can tell Solomon, this is the way it needs to be done. But that's not where his focus is. He charts Solomon, his son, saying this: I go the way of all the earth. Means I'm going to die. Be thou strong, therefore. Show thyself a man. And keep the charge of the Lord thy God. Walk in his ways. Keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, his testimonies. As it is written in the law of Moses. That thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest. And whithersoever thou turnest thyself. Parents, this is the single most important thing we can teach our children. We want them to do well in life. And husbands, fathers in particular, we got to teach our boys what it means to be men. I mean, it's got to be more about, there's got to be more to it than just growing beards, getting tattoos, and shooting guns. I mean, this is the conversation the young men need in our culture. Because there's a terrible shortage of them. I heard one pastor put it this way. He said, if a man-eating lion got loose in America, it would surely starve to death, for there are no men to eat. Some truth to that. All around the world, you will find, 16-year-olds, sometimes even 14-year-old men, picking up a full responsibility and weight for their families, for their household. In our country, you got 30-year-old boys playing video games in mom's basement instead of going to work. watching pornography instead of valuing and investing in real life relationships. And I get that, obviously they're victims of what they were raised under. But at some point, being a man of God after his heart, you've got to decide to break that cycle. And it's hard. It's very challenging. I grew up in a broken home. The influence over me was not the Lord's way. And I'll tell you, man, it's challenging. Thankful for my father-in-law, Jess's dad. He gave me the talk I needed when I was a teenager. He told me that exact thing. You've got to do that. I wasn't expecting to get emotional, I'm sorry. It is impossible in and of yourself to be the man that you were supposed to be. Like, what the Holy Spirit is going to do is bring you to the end of yourself. Especially if you don't have good leadership to look up to. Like, it's just not there in your life. Like, if you get serious about God, what God is going to do is he's going to say, okay, so you need power outside of yourself. You need more wisdom. You need more strength. You need me. You need relationship with the living God. You need to hear and receive and walk in my ways. And God's power will always accompany his purpose. When he calls us to something, he will be there. He will shepherd us through it. But we have got to desire him, and we have got to desire to walk with him. That's where men are made. It's coming from one of the toughest guys to ever walk the planet. A giant slaying king. That's what he leaves to his son. He says, you need to listen to God. You need to learn to trust God. And pay attention, because Solomon, he literally does everything imaginable. Everything you could dream of that a leader should be. Solomon's that guy. For a really long time. I mean, he builds up the kingdom. For all of it, he ends up more empty and broken and lost. Regardless of all the earthly accomplishment, regardless of all his wildest ambitions, the one thing I truly believe that saves Solomon's soul, his life, his legacy, was him having this truth that his father gave him as an anchor for his soul. That's why if you read through Solomon's legacy, and we will, I'm not gonna delve real deep into it because we still got Song of Solomon, we still got Proverbs, we still have Ecclesiastes, and we'll give each of those a week, maybe more, I don't know. But some of the last words we get from Solomon in Ecclesiastes, anybody know what they are? It comes back to this: fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. So David gives this charge to Solomon, and he hears it, but it will take him a lifetime to learn it. For as wise as he is, he's got a lot to learn. He hasn't gotten his wisdom yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in verse 10, David dies. Solomon takes over. Chapter 3 now. You begin to see part of the problem starting already here with Solomon. Chapter 3, look at verse 1. And Solomon made affinity, that is an alliance, with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he made an end of building his own house, the house of the Lord, and the wall of Jerusalem round about. Now, is that not a mixed match verse? Wait a sec, I'm confused. He makes an alliance with Egypt. He marries one of the daughters of the Pharaoh. Why in the world would he do that? I mean, weren't they slaves to this people at one time? Didn't God pour out his wrath over them? Didn't he crush them to release Israel and set them free that they would build their own kingdom? What is this? Solomon making an alliance with them? I'll tell you what it is. At this point, King Solomon, he's more interested in having a strong relationship with other nations than having a strong relationship with God, with Jehovah God. This is a power move for him. And then like I said, it's so mixed mash because at the same time he is concerned with building up the kingdom. Look at verse 3. This is what really concerns me. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Watch this. Only he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places. We've talked about high places some, but just in case you missed it, I'm going to rehash it a bit. That's not him getting good quiet time devotions with Jehovah God. All right, the term high places refers to pagan altars. You're going to see a lot of those going up as you move through the Kings. There were places outside the city, up in the hills, totally disconnected and sort of mixed in and blended with other religions in the surrounding nations, where all things were sacrificed to. Sometimes children sacrificed on these altars to pagan gods, under the big trees or in caves, areas that were dedicated to pagan worship, blended worship. So him going there was an expression of Solomon saying, you know what, I'll just take a little bit of everything. Listen, to worship a little bit of everything is not to give proper worship to the only true living God. Solomon loved the Lord, walked in the statutes of David his father, but he worshipped in high places. I mean, he is a classic example as you're reading through this of like, oh man, yes, Solomon, you're awesome, you're doing great. Oh, what is that? Why would you do that? It's all of that all at once. He's conflicted early on here. He makes the unholy alliance, but he's also building up the kingdom. He loves the Lord, but he's also sacrificing in the high places. What we are seeing is a conflict in his own heart. If you don't know what you stand for, you will fall for anything. Another kind of looming, ominous thing here. I'm taking a bride from Egypt. Solomon's main issue is going to be with women. How many of you didn't know that? Yeah, he is going to have a serious problem. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, that's his main thing. Crystal clear. It's going to be made clear to us here real soon. The question I would just ask you to be thinking about, though, as we work our way toward that, is this: if he has such a colossal problem with women, you know, where did he learn that from? Where did he get that from? What was his influence? What did that stem from? I gotta say it had to be his dad. David was awesome in a lot of ways, but he made mistakes too, and he wasn't a perfect man. He was a man after God's own heart, and that he acknowledged sin, and he repented, but man, he picked up some good things from dad, and he also picked up some bad things. I mean, Solomon himself was conceived in adultery. Well, I shouldn't say that. He was David and Bathsheba were married by the time Solomon came along, but David took Bathsheba from Uriah. Had a sibling, an older sibling that would have died. What I'm trying to say is this: fathers, you have got to be mindful of the patterns and the behaviors that you are impressing onto your kids. Have those conversations when you screw up. Tell them why you were wrong. Tell them why God is right. Tell them how you repented. Literally had a conversation with my boys this morning in my office about something simple. And, it was just a heated moment, some tension, and I just had to tell them, listen, just because Daddy acts like an idiot sometimes, and doesn't mean it's okay for you too. We got to do that. All right. Control our tempers and the volume of her voice and things like that when things are going wrong in the house. And this is things that young men need to hear. But David had an issue with women, and he's going to pass that on to Solomon, really. And he's going to take what Dad did, and he's going to go to the furthest extreme. For now, I just want you to see that there is this conflict and this compromise in Solomon. He's going to be found next here in the city of Gibeon. And while he is there, God speaks to him in the night, asking, all right, Solomon, look at it. What do you really want? Could you imagine God doing that with you? Josh, what do you really want out of this life? Noah, what are you really after? Could you imagine having that conversation with God? Most of us would probably be thinking, a few extra dollars wouldn't hurt. Beef up my bank account a bit. I think the go-to for all of us is happiness. I just want to be happy. Maybe have some power. What does he ask for? Look at it in verse 9. You probably already know. It's in verse 9. It talks about discernment between good and bad. That is having wisdom. And God says, because you asked for this wisdom and not all those other things that you could have asked for, guess what? I'm going to give them to you anyway. If you look at the picture on your chart, you get an example of where his wisdom is first really seen. We read about it in the second half of the chapter. There's two prostitutes who have children. They each have children. One dies in the middle of the night. The one with the baby that dies switches with the other mom, and the two women are brought in before Solomon. And the one woman goes, okay, that child that is alive is mine. Hers is the dead one. And then the other woman claims the same thing. No. Hers is the dead one. Mine's the one that is alive. And Solomon says, all right, here's what we're going to do. We'll just cut the baby in half. You both can get a piece. The fake mother, obviously, says, great idea, let's do that. The true mother said, no, I can't agree to those terms and conditions. Obviously, Solomon found out very quickly who the true mother was, the one who would not want her child cut in half. It does beg the question why the other woman would actually be okay with the child being split in two. And if you want to talk about it after service, I think there's a really good answer for that. But I am not going to bore. We don't have the time to unpack all the details. I'll tell you this. If you understand Hebrew law, you understand the cultural custom of the day, it is a very complicated issue. Because I think that's what it really plays into. You've got to understand some more of those things to really understand why she would be okay with the child being cut in half. Essentially, she wanted that child to go because it would benefit her more. There was apparently some relation and connection there. Again, won't get into all of it, but we can reasonably suspect what the case was. The bottom line is this: an issue that would have had everybody else going, oh man, I don't know what we do about this. This is confusing. There's no witnesses. Like Solomon just, pun intended, cut right through the heart of the issue, and with great discernment in a moment. And so by chapter 4, you see his fame is spreading across the known world, far beyond Israel, into the other nations. Everybody is seeing that this king is wise. He is so, he's got great discernment. And if you kind of look at the verses there, I'm not going to read them all, but you'll see he's not just a wise leader himself, but he is carved out and he's ordaining other wise leaders over those providences around him. And these guys are bringing in gifts of tribute and recognition. They're saying David is wiser than all of the poets and the musicians and the historians, wiser than the priests. He's just got such a deep understanding of God and his heart and our place in history. Solomon greatly increased with his wisdom, sustained the kingdom through his wisdom. His reign will be the pinnacle of Israel's history. The following chapters give us a glimpse of that. Look at chapter 5. Chapter 5, Solomon is going to follow through with that big project David had in mind? Remember? Anybody remember what it was? David said he wanted to do something. What was it?
Temple.
Build the temple. That's right. Okay. David wanted to build the temple. God said, no, Solomon will do that. Chapter 5 is where you're getting the blueprint for the temple. He is following through with David's dream. Chapter 6, you get the actual construction. If you want to flip over, just skim it. We're not going to read through it all. But that's what you have there. These details are important. In chapter 7, Solomon is building himself a palace. The temple is underway, under construction. Solomon decides he's going to build his own palace. And then in chapter 8, look at it, we see the grand opening of the temple. And this is a pretty powerful moment. But I do want to kind of build it out this way. And you might disagree with me, but I'm just going to be honest with you from what I see in the Bible. I am not 100% convinced that God wanted the temple built. He permitted it, but he doesn't prescribe it. Like if you read through the Exodus account, you see him prescribing everything, right? The building of the tabernacle. He told him what material to use. He told him how to build it. Everything down to the measurements, the people to use. It was God said this. God said this. The Lord said this to Moses and to Aaron. And if you read about the temple getting put up, it's, well, David wanted this. This is how David wanted it to be done. David desired to do it for the Lord. And it was a good, right, honorable desire. Please don't misunderstand me there. I'm just saying that I think they get so fixated on this temple that they kind of forget the purpose later. You know, they're so focused on building a physical house for the Lord, even after the exile. Like that's where their focus is. And again, not that it's totally bad. It's just at the same time, they're missing the mark on what the temple was supposed to be as a connection point for true worshipers. They're like, oh, we're going to have this big, beautiful thing, and it's going to last forever. And God's like, hey, no, it's not. It's going to get destroyed. Because you're not going to value the relationship with me. You're not going to worship me as I'm supposed to be worshipped. This thing's only going to be temporary. What's going to be far more important is not will they have a place to go and worship God, but will God have a place to be worshipped in their heart and life. The Old Testament temple is really no different from the New Testament church building. All right? It is a meeting place for worshipers. It is a good, right desire to build up the meeting place and take care of what we typically refer to as the house of the Lord. You got to understand, really the believer is the true house, as the Holy Spirit abides in them. 1 Corinthians 6:21. That's what's most important. Building a people for God is far more important than building a place for Him. Keep that in mind as these things are getting put together. Chapter 8, verse 1, Solomon is going to have them bring in the Ark of the Covenant now. Look what else they bring in. In verse 4, the tabernacle. Oh, we haven't seen this thing mentioned for a while. The first time in a long time. The tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, they're reconciled, brought back together for worship. This is cool, man. This is really exciting. Some suggest Solomon even had the tabernacle set up inside the Holy of Holies, because dimension-wise there was room for it, and he has it brought in. So look what happens now in verse 10. The priests have set everything up, and they go out, and then the glory of God comes down. The cloud fills the temple. It's really cool. Still works the same way for us today, church. If we want to be a people who sees God show up among us, we just need to be a people who are concerned with the things He's concerned about. His word being honored, exalted, us being humbled, brought together. This is where God is moving among them. All right, now look at verse 22. Let's jump down there. Solomon goes before the altar. He bows his head, reaches up towards the heavens, and begins to pray. I'm not going to read it all, but I would encourage you to, in your time this week, read through this. It's so good. I'm gonna skip down to verse 54. By the end of this prayer, he's on the ground. He starts off and he's standing, he's raising his hands, and he's speaking to the Lord. But by the end of this thing, he's leveled. He's on the ground. And I can just picture some trembling and some tears. I'm just a little conjecture on my part maybe, but if you read through the prayer, you'll understand why Solomon is down at the ground on his face at this point. He's been pleading with the Lord. Father, watch over this place. Have mercy on our country. Work in us. Work through the people who are gathered here. Judge those who are wicked. Justify those who would walk in righteousness. Remain with us always. We need you. We can't do this without you. And after praying over them, he preaches to them. In verse 57 and 58, look at those. These words are a little familiar. Watch this. He says, the Lord our God be with us as he was with our fathers. Let him not leave us nor forsake us, that he may incline our hearts unto him. Watch, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, which he commanded our fathers. And like I said, you feel like Solomon gets it, and he's arriving as a leader. He's applying what David told him to be and do. After that, man, you can see in the following verses, there's a big feast and celebrations. It goes on for 2 weeks. And finally, Solomon's got to, you guys got to go home. Or he shuts it down. We have had awesome services here at New Life. I have never had one that lasted 2 weeks. Might feel like that sometimes, preaching, but it's just like the people loved the Lord. They loved one another. It was a very exciting time. And like I said, the last few verses tell us Solomon has to give orders, send the people away. But look at it. It says they go home with their hearts being so full of joy. It's beautiful. Then in chapter 9, verse 2, Solomon is screwing up again. The Lord still comes to him, still speaks to Solomon, still gives him really a warning. Watch this. Where is Solomon when God appears to him here in this chapter? Anybody see it? Where's he at? He's back in the place of Gibeon. What's in Gibeon? The high places, the pagan altars. Consider that, because God speaks to him in verse 3. He says, Solomon, I heard your prayer, and I'm going to do what you pray for. I'm going to grant those things. A lot of them, you're going to, if you walk in my ways, man, I will do just that. I will provide, I will protect. But if you or your children turn from me and you start seeking other gods, you see what he says? It's a warning. You will be cut off. You will be that fruitless branch that Jesus would warn his disciples about. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You will wither up and die. Jehovah is saying you need to abide in me. And there will be fruit. But if you don't abide in me, you get cut off. It's tough. That's reality. That cannot be changed. That is ultimate truth. What's hard for me is I'm reading through this, and I really wrestle with what to talk about and what not to talk about. I don't want to shortchange any of these chapters. That's why I'm only doing half the book today. But over and over, it tells us Solomon loved the Lord, but in the next minute, he doesn't serve him only. He's becoming a guy who tries to follow God, but refuses to give anything up. And all I can picture is the rich young ruler, Matthew 19. Remember this guy? He said to Jesus, I've done it all. I've kept the law. What more must I do to be your disciple? What did Jesus say to him? Let go. Sell all your possessions. Give the money to the poor. If you can't do that, then you can't follow me and be my disciple. It was an indirect way of saying you've got to trust me with everything you've got. And he wasn't ready to do that. Solomon isn't either. This is a warning. God is saying you cannot worship me and cling to all this other stuff. And Solomon and all his wisdom, I really believe that registers in his brain, but it doesn't get here. Not yet. He doesn't apply it to his heart. There's a disjoint here somewhere, a disconnect. Does anybody else know what that's like? Anybody at all? Am I the only one? I feel really alone. So let me see some hands if you know what it's like to know what God desires, but just not be able to always walk in it. Okay, a few more honest folks. Thank you. The rest of you are liars, so you'll just continue to benefit that fact, all right? You know what's right, but you don't do it. The Apostle Paul would talk about this too. The things I want to do, I'm not doing. The things I don't want to do, that's what I find myself doing. Who will deliver me from this wretched man that I am? He says in Romans 7, only Christ. Only Christ. But friends, never on this side of eternity can we imagine, understand, or experience the level of wealth and prosperity and pleasure that Solomon experienced, and all that he had weighing on him, honestly. All that he wrestled with. Because you know what? We can kind of relate to it a little bit and how it feels with just having a small sliver of that stuff in our own life. It's easy for us to get distracted. It's easy for us to get complacent in our walk with God, even with the little bit of stuff we have. Could you imagine if God heaped up all the things that Solomon had? Oh, it would be tough. Man. And yet God appears to Solomon right here while he's worshiping in a pagan high place. And he says, I'll give you what you want, what you need, and then some. But I want you to trust me. I want you to love me, follow me. And God even reiterates the covenant that he gave to his father, David. The promise that someone from his line will be on that throne forever into eternity. But I just want you to kind of keep an eye on the foreboding nature here of Solomon. His character has just got these cracks in it, and he doesn't want to see them. And God is pleading with him, take hold of me, Solomon. You can't do this. You can't do it this way. And again, Solomon, he says, okay, I hear you, Lord. And he tries to hold on to God with one hand, but hold on to everything else with the other hand. And he tears himself apart. Chapter 10, the Queen of Sheba doesn't really do him any favors. She kind of feeds into his ego. Queen of Sheba from Arabia. That's what you'd see in chapter 10. She shows up to see the great and mighty wisdom of Solomon. She basically goes round and round with him playing Jeopardy, asking him questions, and he answers all her questions, and she just marvels. She thinks he is amazing. And he really is. I'm not going to say he isn't. That doesn't do anything to humble him, all right? Just really stokes his ego. And I'll tell you why God allowed it, though. Here's the cool thing about it. This is Israel just beginning to be the light to the nations that they were supposed to be. God showing that the potential was there, and this could have happened just the way it was intended. All the nations are seeing Israel. All the nations want to get close to the wisdom of this king who is ruling with the wisdom of God. And it's like, I can see exactly what God said was going to, it's beautiful, it's amazing for like 2 minutes. We're almost there. Chapter 11 comes. Verse 1. We see Solomon is distracted. Solomon falls, just like David, just like Saul. Chapter 11, verse 1. King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh. That's where it started. But now women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, the Hittites. How many wives did he have? A lot. Of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go in unto them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. How could they not when you have 700? Have you ever tried to love one person? Especially if that one person doesn't love God? That's hard, man. 700. It's like the most bizarre kind of reality TV show playing out at this point. I mean, it's one of those just cringy things that I couldn't honestly watch. Like, there's sometimes where we've been watching The Bachelor, and it's worse than that. It's like Bachelor in Paradise times 700. It's just a train wreck to imagine. 1,000 women in his harem. Can we all agree that's a little excessive? Yeah. I mean, regardless of guy taking on responsibility for certain women, as we mentioned last week, there was some good honorable stuff in that day and age. But 1,000? It's not good, honorable, righteous. That is lust. It's pride. Insatiable desire of his flesh. Now, even if we really stretch it to say that maybe Solomon was just concerned for their welfare and maybe he was just trying to get all these foreign people saved. It's not what happens. They lead him astray. Young people, pay attention to this. Verse 4. It came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. What do you think Solomon was thinking when he was young and he's picking up all these girls? I can handle it. I'll change them. I'll get them to serve God. One day we'll all love the Lord together. It won't affect me. I'll affect them. But they wooed his heart away. Look at verse 5. Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom and the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. Likewise, did he for all his strange wives, and burn incense and sacrifice unto their gods. What's the result? Skip down for verse 29. 29 and following tells us because of his leadership, there's going to be division, serious division in the kingdom. The kingdom is going to fall apart. It was united under David, but after Solomon's reign, it will be split up. And the question is asked, like, what happened to our guy here? Why is this man ever? That's not very wise. Church, don't confuse wisdom with godliness. There is a difference. He may have been wise, but he didn't walk in the wisdom. Even as wise as you can be, the heart is still bent on destruction. Hell and death is never full, so the eyes of men are never satisfied. Intellectual assent alone will not restore the human heart. More and more information on us without genuine transformation in here, it will only create more and more burdens for us out there. If you watch the flow of Solomon's life, this is what unfolds. And we're going to talk about it in his writings here over the next couple of weeks. Song of Solomon, the early part of his life, all the love, and going after that. It's beautiful. It is prophetic. What is captured there in a lot of those verses. The Proverbs over time are there, but the Ecclesiastes by the end, man, if you've ever read through that one, it is not pretty. It is bitter. I mean, he says everything reeks of death. Everything under the sun is empty. The best entertainment and wine and women, the parties, all of it is not enough. It'll leave you wanting. He ends up full circle at the end of his life, just desiring to be restored in a relationship with God, which is the one thing David told him to be after. And that's how his life ends. So let's just talk about Solomon just for a minute as we close out here. Wisest man who's ever lived. What's your conclusion? Is he a success or is he a failure? He built a temple, that's great. He built the palace up, great, man. He expanded the borders, great. Took care of the people, good. Isn't he a success? Why do you read about the end of his life and it just feels like a catastrophic failure? Because what really counts from the counsel of the Word of God is this character on the inside. And so he built himself a 4-story house, but who cares? He lost his soul in the process. He had a fleet of ships. He built up a prosperous, beautiful kingdom. Built up the temple even. But what would a man give in exchange for his soul? Would it be worth it? If the person on the inside is lost to God. Remember what the Lord said. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks upon the heart. That's where God's looking, and Solomon's heart is dark. You might live your entire life completely insignificant and irrelevant in this world. It might feel like nobody knows your name, nobody would care if you disappeared tomorrow. Except work, they would have your position posted immediately. You know, you'll die faithful though, and God will say, enter in and rest and enter into my joy. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. What would you rather have? I'm just trying to encourage you, don't buy into this lie that you have got to have X, Y, Z to be successful, because Solomon did it all. He had it all. But if you're successful in everything but this, who cares what kind of car you drive? Who cares what your home looks like? If your kids if your kids don't love the Lord, if you don't love the Lord, what else matters more? What matters for us today as brothers and sisters, under the grace of God, and the knowledge and revelation in Christ is this. To be a new creation means to walk with your God, to love your spouse, to be faithful to your kids, to work hard at your job. And then when that day comes, that you go the way of all the earth, everybody is left with this understanding that, man, he really loved God most. Really served the Lord above everything else. That's what the impact we want to make. The irony to me in all of this is there's nobody more successful in the Bible. But he succeeded in all the wrong things. His legacy is one that you just read through and you shake your head, man. Like, you had the wisdom, you had the favor of God, you had the women, you had the house, the power, the position, the prestige. You had it all, but you couldn't control your own appetite. And it ate you alive. It devoured you. When we read through this story in disappointment, don't just look at Solomon, but look at yourself. And consider the weight of the invitation this morning as we stand together.